Good morning, everyone. My name is Carl Johnson from Cleared Systems, and today we are going to talk about vulnerability scanning versus penetration testing, specifically around federal contractors, DIB, defense manufacturers, anyone that is working with COI and working with national security. First, let's talk about why it's important. The important parts to it is that you should not assume that your systems are not constantly under attack. In fact, if you are a defense manufacturer or defense contractor, the likelihood is that you are under attack more than a normal organization. All too many times, the penetration testing or the vulnerability scans happen after a data breach. It's important to think proactively and set tasks for your team that you are constantly doing vulnerability scans and penetration testing. And we'll talk a little bit about this in our presentation today. So there is sometimes a misunderstanding between the two. So let's first break down what exactly is vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning is one normally performed internally, not always, but normally you want to be performing your own vulnerability scanning. Two, it is checking for weaknesses and the vulnerabilities you have inside of your organization. With this, you're normally coming up with legacy applications and software. You're also identifying any gaps in security itself along the way. Vulnerability scanning is not necessarily always a digital task. It could also be physical as well. There's many tools that are out there. Probably the most common is Nessus, Qualys, OpenVAS. That's also tools that we use. I suggest that companies should do vulnerability scanning weekly. I just don't feel or think that monthly uh, is a good idea. And the reason why I say that, especially for federal contractors and DIB and defense manufacturers, is that one, software is constantly being updated, and also you have a lot of outdated applications that are sitting out there. One example that we hear often, time and time again, is Adobe. Adobe is known for having vulnerabilities, and I have worked with many companies that are still using Adobe Acrobat Reader from 5 or 6 years ago, full of vulnerabilities. Also, if you have systems that use Java, especially legacy Java, if you're using ASP.NET, like classic ASP and different things like that, you most definitely want to constantly do vulnerability scanning. Now, the remediation that comes with vulnerability scanning, that should be done in parallel, right? So you're not going to be able to resolve all the vulnerabilities you have weekly, but there should be a priority list created that you identify the large risk or the high risk, and you constantly work on those risks. Don't wait for a month or quarter. And if you don't have the resources, Cleared Systems, for instance, we help companies do vulnerability scanning, but most definitely don't use the excuse of not having resources. Have someone that is constantly doing your scans and constantly doing your remediation of your scans. For penetration testing is a little different, right? For penetration testing, we are actually simulating an attack, right? So we are, with the company's permission, we are approaching the company as if we are um, a, a hacker, and that we are trying to penetrate certain systems It may be planned in the sense that the customer has told us exactly what systems they would like us to target, or in a case where it's unplanned, where we just have very very short set of orders to go by, and we conduct pen testing. This also could be from a physical perspective, or if we are going through, or if we're going through web, maybe database, IoT devices. For instance, some of our customers are PCB board manufacturers and have semiconductors that we're targeting, maybe specific systems that they have. Either way, with penetration testing, it allows you to prepare your company for the occasion of an attack. And also with this, and what I recommend is that you look at your restore and your backup procedures while you are doing penetration testing. In a real world or a real world example of your systems being penetrated, especially if we're talking about hackers and ransomware, you want to be able to have a way to back up your systems and restore your systems so that your business does not skip a beat or very little downtime. Some of the common tools, Burp Suite is what we use, but there's all types of tools out there. Either way, you most definitely want to do penetration testing. Penetration testing, I would say, is probably more of a semi-annual. I would even say do it monthly, but that's just me. I think that the hacker only has to get it right once versus you have to get it right every single time. The more you're prepared and more your team is prepared, the better. Inside of penetration testing, we sometimes include phishing as well, to add to it, because sometimes we want to do like a 1-2 attack onto the target. So again, it's best to either do it semi-annually, but I would recommend monthly for the best result. Especially again if you are a federal contractor, and you want to make sure that your systems are safe. So some of the key differences we have, right, is with vulnerability scanning, we are normally going in and knowing known vulnerabilities itself, versus when we're talking about penetration testing, we are exploiting vulnerabilities. A great example is Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer has been out of is been out of commission for quite some time now, but there's still lots of customers that still use Internet Explorer because it's tied to, maybe, let's say, IIS application. Well, it has loads and loads of vulnerabilities. Those are things that we like to look at when we're targeting. And as I said before, Adobe, VPNs that have not been patched correctly, Windows systems that have not properly been stigged. Any way we can find a way of targeting or going after the target, we will find. And a lot of times it's just through your WordPress website or whichever you use, Drupal, whatever it is, because companies do not maintain the plugins for their websites. When to use each. Again, like I mentioned before, regular, right, for vulnerability scanning. You want to do it quite regularly. It's not something I would say do it every annually. I would, again, I'm being conservative, but I like weekly. Sounds great to me. I know that takes a lot of time and resources, but weekly to me I feel is the best. Monthly is right there in the middle. Quarterly I think is way too long, right? So I'm more on the side of weekly or monthly. The same is true for penetration testing. Penetration testing, I know that sometimes per some regulations that you want to do it annually. I would say again, either monthly, Semi-annually is fine, but don't think that just because you did vulnerability scanning, now you don't need to do penetration testing. The two should work together and go side by side, whether you're using outside companies like Cleared Systems or if you're doing it yourself. The types of boxes. So whether we're talking about penetration testing or vulnerability scanning, one thing that we need to define is what type of knowledge are we going to have of the target or the systems. So for black box, which is normally the case that we're given, black box testing, no knowledge of any of the systems, nothing of inner workings. We don't know anything about the applications that the customer is using, and we're basically told, here's your target, go at it. With white box, the customer has said that we want you to target one specific application or one specific case. For example, it may be, especially if you're going for CMMC 2.0 and the customer says, hey, we want you to target this specific system to see if you're able to find vulnerabilities, or if we need to create poems based on the findings. For gray box is that we know a little about the systems. Maybe we've been provided a list of different types of systems, but we have not been provided any source code, any access keys, or anything like that. Just we're told this is a system. We want you to target it and provide a report afterwards. And I'll say, say it again, like I mentioned before. Scanning and testing is something that you should regularly do. Between the two, scanning is for regular monitoring and testing is for deep assessments. But don't think that it's because it's a deep assessment that you should wait an entire year. There is nothing wrong with constantly testing your system, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for holes in your system, especially if you have a lot of legacy applications that you run. If you have a company that and you have supply chain applications, most definitely you should be constantly running penetration testing and vulnerability scans. Remediation is most important as well. With remediation comes patching, comes stigging. You should have a plan that coincides with both. Not just think that, okay, we went ahead, we did our scans, we know that we have some vulnerabilities out there, but we're going to keep putting them on the back burner. You really should take this time to remediate as many of the vulnerabilities as possible. If you don't have the resources to do so, then slow down your vulnerability scanning until your team can catch up on remediation. So when we are talking about regulatory requirements, NIST 800-171, CMMC require vulnerability scans, right, and penetration tests, especially when we're looking at controls. A perfect example is ACL. This is one point that we see oftentimes where you have employees that are no longer with the company, but their credentials are still active inside of Active Directory. This is a pretty easy one to solve, but still, when we're talking about NIST 800-171 and CMMC and vulnerabilities, that's the very first thing we often look for. With DFARS 252, we're looking at CUI, and CUI in the sense of, are you mixing CUI in with all the other documents you have inside your organization? So are you properly classifying documents that belong to the federal government, or are you using there's no labeling, there's no type of no type of life cycle for the documents that belong to the federal government. When we're talking about CMMC levels 2 and 3, most of the penetration scanning or penetration testing is a requirement along with vulnerability scanning. And going back to what I mentioned before, both of these should be done together. and it should be constantly done on your systems. One thing I also want to mention is your findings should also be secure, right? So not everyone in the organization or outside the organization should be able to see your findings. They should be locked up because they're just as important, right? They're talking about vulnerabilities to your systems, so they should most of it be locked up tight, and only those who need to know should be able to review that data. So, what have we learned? One, scanning versus pen testing, also known as penetration testing. If you are a federal contractor, DIB, defense manufacturer, it's not an option. It's critical that you do this. Don't wait until it's too late and you have a spill, whether we're talking about CUI spill or just a regular data spill or breach. You want to constantly be doing scans and tests. Now, if you have any questions about either of these, or if you need assistance, especially if you need a third-party assessor, Cleared Systems, we perform about 200 to 300 penetration tests a month. Scans, probably around the same, a little bit more as far as vulnerability scans. And we have customers that employ us to do it regularly for us. So if you have any questions whatsoever, please reach out to Cleared Systems. If you like this content and you want to see more of it, we'll be putting more videos out. Please like and subscribe, and we'll be coming out with more videos related to cybersecurity and compliance.